Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. It's time for the C3 stream. Oops, hold on. There we go. Hello everyone. Hello, and greetings. Greetings from the Sir Family Studio, aka my basement office. I am back. Thank you for your patience and your prayers and your support. I have been unwell these last 3 weeks. I've had a nasty bout of something. I had an autoimmune reaction to something that just laid me flat. So thank you for your prayers, your support, your encouragement. Pastor Bob was on last week. Thank you to Pastor Bob. He came over and recorded special for you guys. In fact, he had to do it twice because I screwed up the recording the first time. So big shout out to him. But it's good. At least I'm working with some great doctors. Saw the doctors this afternoon. Spent time with doctors this afternoon. Slowly reintegrating back into some work stuff. So if you've emailed me in like the last 3 weeks, I've been pretty MIA. It kind of comes and goes with energy levels, and the doctors are working with me to keep me on good medicines and medications. It's if you ever want modern miracles, just talk to a doctor. It's incredible. But one of the things that I wanted to prioritize was getting back to streaming and connecting with you and showing you that I'm okay, just on a slow, steady plod of recovery and healing. I am not. What's the term? I'm not infectious. I can't get anybody else sick. It was just myself and something related to my own internal system and my own body. And so my body is still in some pretty big shock, according to the doctors. They say probably another. Hi, oh, tomorrow's there. Yeah. Hey, Joe. Hi, Haley. Yeah. Getting back. Very weak. Lots of sleep, lots of rest, lots of meds. But at least I can be upright. I've had solid food for the last 3 days, and that is exciting. I can now do solid food. I've lost 10 pounds. Ooh, so it'll take some time to gain that back. But, yeah, back to solid food, and that's a big, big win. I had a tuna sandwich. It tasted awesome. It was so good. When all you've had is shakes and watery oatmeal for like 12 days, a tuna fish sandwich, the thing was amazing. It was so good. So, anyways, less about me. Hi, Elfie. Hey, Michael. Yeah, thanks. It is good to be back. It's fun to be getting back. Like I said, I really wanted to prioritize getting back into streaming and making sure that people knew that yeah, we're getting better. So that's good. Still far from 100%, but at least we're making progress back towards health and well-being. The doctor said probably another 3 to 4 weeks before I'm actually back to kind of where I was before in terms of health, energy levels, and so forth. So probably another 3 weeks. I'm hoping positive rather than negative. Probably another 3 weeks or so. But did want to connect with you guys and spend some time with you on the stream because we got some teaching to do. We have things to talk about. We have things to talk about. There we go. There. That's pretty good, right? Ah. Huh. It's different from the last time I did it. Oh, see, things change, guys. You go away for 2 weeks. Oh, that's trippy. Let me see if I can fix it quick. We might just have to deal with it. But that's okay. All the important stuff's on the page. Yeah, so let's do it. Let's do class. Welcome to the C3 stream, Tuesday night teachings. This sort of stuff gives me energy, so that's good. Like I get jazzed and excited at oh, that's why. Okay. Hold on one second. this stuff helps bring me energy. And so that was one of the reasons why I really wanted to get back to kind of where we were. You guys know what I mean? Like, you get excited for something, you think about it, you get excited for it. And I get a lot of joy and a lot of pleasure out of teaching. I get really, you guys give me a chance to nerd out, and that's cool. Not often I get to nerd out. Biblical nerd out. Okay. And push that. There we go. That's better. Is that better? That's better. Now you can see it. Look here. So, oh man, I am all over the place, guys. Okay. Stop touching things. Here we go. Hi, Susan. Thanks. Yeah, you missed my sound effects. Thanks. My singing and sound effects. Thanks. It's fun. I have fun with you guys. I think it's a lot of fun to be able to do all this stuff. So I was really grateful. Pastor Bob, like I said, Pastor Bob came and he knew that I was down and out. For the first pretty much week, 7 days, I was unable to talk. I did not have the ability to talk. And so I had to figure out with him how to communicate. So you should have seen our text chains were quite long. But we figured out how to get him in here, and so thank you to him. He came in special. He prepared special. He did a great job, and took us as a group. He got us up through the judges in the time of the judges, right, which is really big. So, in fact, I can go back. The last graphic would be this one. This is a good graphic. So this shows the tribes of Israel. So we're in the Old Testament. If you're tuning in for the first time, quick recap, we're in the Old Testament before the time of Jesus. We are walking 30,000 foot level, and we're tracking through the Bible on this class right now, the class that we're doing on Tuesday night teachings. And we have a ton to cover because I love Pastor Bob, and he covered some great material. He took us into the scriptures, which is awesome, and we've got to make up some ground. So we're coming off of the Judges. So today, we are going to cover basically 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, Chronicles, Ruth. We're covering like 9 books of the Bible tonight if we can, guys. And some big characters too, like King David. You guys heard of King David before? You know him? We're covering him tonight. So here we go. Where you left off with Pastor Bob was how the nation of Israel, by now they are kind of like a nation. They're a group of people. They have come out of Egypt. They were in slavery in Egypt. God brought them out of Egypt. He gave them the 10 Commandments, and he gave them 613 laws, rules, that would be cultural touch points for them that really defined what it meant to be Jewish, okay? The word Jewish actually didn't exist till much later, much more recently. At this time, they were called the Hebrews. And the Hebrew nation was comprised of 12 groups, 12 tribes. And these 12 tribes came into what is ancient Israel, or what we consider now today modern-day Palestine and modern-day Israel. They came into Israel and took it over. There's a lot of warfare at this time. It was not exactly what you would describe as a peaceful season. A lot of tribal warfare, both infighting and outfighting, fighting each other as well as fighting the indigenous population of the place. And the biggest issue at this time that you covered with Pastor Bob was during this time, rather than purge the ancient Israel, the land of the indigenous people, they also intermarried with some of them. And by intermarrying against God's orders, by intermarrying with the indigenous people, came the indigenous practices and indigenous religion. And so Judges is this really nasty story. It's this nasty cycle of things go bad, and then God has to raise up a leader to rescue the people. And then they're good for a little while, and then they start picking up the habits and practices of the indigenous people again and worshiping idols. And so they kind of bail on God. And so, that's kind of like the over and over and over. And the way that the entire book is summed up in the last couple of verses, it says that basically the people did what was right in their own eyes. So that's the Bible's way of saying, the author's way of saying, people stopped taking what God wanted seriously and really became a law unto themselves. They decided what was best for themselves. And you know what it's like when people decide for themselves what's best for themselves? Woo! It's actually kind of scary, to be honest. When people are left to their own without outside input or collective or anything like that, when everybody does what they think is best all the time, the scary reality is that we become isolated in our thought process, and we don't have a larger community to run things through and by and have discernment and conversation and all that sort of stuff. The stuff that keeps us healthy and balanced. When you take that all away and everybody does whatever they want, things get really messy really fast. And that's what happened in the case of the judges. So things going into tonight, as we begin kind of picking it up, things are not good. In fact, Judges get so bad, the final story of Judges is just horrific. It's the book of Judges starts with them fighting the indigenous people and ends with them fighting each other. So much so that one of the tribes gets basically wiped out. They commit internal genocide and decide to kill one of their own relative, like the cousins down the street type thing. Like they say, hey, you know your cousins up north? They end up going up north and stealing the women to marry them for themselves, and then they want to wipe out all the guys. It gets bad. All right, it is a messed up story. If you want a really messed up one that you don't cover in Sunday school, read the last bit of Judges. Ooh, it's nasty, and it shows the progression of sin, evil, of how things get so out of hand that by the end of the book, I mean, the things are not going well. Things need to change. And even the people themselves recognize it. Okay? The Hebrew nation is looking at themselves and they're like, oh yeah, we almost wiped out a part of the family. That's probably not good. We need to change. The Hebrew collective, this tribal confederation, recognizes that things are not good. And so different people have different opinions on how or what they should do to make sure that things get better. And the simple answer is they look around and they're looking at all these other kingdoms, and they're looking at outside of Israel at competing nations. And the simple answer is pretty straightforward. We need a king. We want a king. A king will fix it. A king will make it better. A king and a unified government will fix all the problems. If the problem right now is that everybody is doing whatever they want in their own eyes, let's focus it all on one person and do what one person thinks. It's like the pendulum swings to the other side. It goes from anybody can do whatever they want to everybody has to do what the one guy wants. Okay? And so naturally, that's so human. The pendulum just swings so far and so fast, right? I mean, we find that in our own lives where we're on one point and then the pendulum swings and we're totally in a different place. That's what happened here. And so they're looking at other competing nation states in the area, and they have kings and they seem to be doing okay. So like, let's get our own king, you know? And so that's what they do. They go to the last judge. His name is Samuel. They use that term judge, but like when you and I hear that term judge, we picture the guy in the robes with the lady with the long curly English thing. You know what I'm talking about? The hairpiece. It's got a name. And like a gavel, right? That's not what the Bible's talking about. When it uses the term judge, it doesn't mean that. A judge in the biblical sense is more like a spiritual and militaristic leader. Okay? You take a general who's got faith and you put them together, and that's a judge. A judge is when you have a general who is competent and capable militarily, but who is also, in addition to being a military genius and a military guy or gal, there are male and female judges, They also are spiritually based. They're God's people. They understand and take God seriously. So it finishes with this guy named Samuel, who is a good guy. Samuel's a good guy, and he does his best. And he's got 2 books of the Bible that have to do with Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel. And the people come to Samuel and say, Samuel, we want a king. A king is going to fix our problems. And Samuel's like, you're all nuts. That's not going to... The problem here is not having a king. The problem here is not even the type of government. Any type of government can work. The problem here is sin. The problem here is y'all ain't faithful. The problem here is y'all aren't listening and living in such a way as to honor God. That's the problem here. And they look at him and they say, oh, we want a king. And he's like, are you kidding me? Like, a king is going to give you... You know what you get when a king... It actually says this in the Bible. It's really great. He's like, you know what you get with a king? You get taxes and forced conscription. That's what he says. He's like, that's what kings do. They tax you, and then they take your sons into the army. That's what a king does. And they're like, no, we don't care. We want a king. Now, what's really important, too, is there's a theological statement being made when they make the assertion of a king. There are different words used in Hebrew in the Bible to describe king versus prince. And that's why if you look at that graphic there, it says king, prince. And it's voting, because that's what they do. They're like, come on, let's all take a vote. Robert's Rules of Order. I vote that I move that we have a king. I second, I third, let's vote. And the danger here, and what happens here, is they latch onto an understanding of king as opposed to latching onto a concept and an understanding of prince. God and Samuel, as God's kind of spokesperson, is actually okay with the idea of prince. And you're like, what's the difference? There's actually a very big difference. Theologically, who's in charge, a king or a prince? That would be a king. So, if the people elect a king, they're saying the king is now in charge, whereby asserting God himself is not any longer in charge. If you have a human king, you don't have a divine king. You can have a human prince who adheres to and upholds the king's laws, in which case a prince would be okay. A prince is a spokesperson, a prince is a ruler, a prince is one who embodies and carries out and brings forward the king's will. And so a prince theologically is okay because God can remain king and there can be a prince. And the Bible will use different terms depending on who's speaking in the story and what they're talking about. The people want a king, a human king. Samuel says, bad idea. They say, we want him anyway. So Samuel's like, okay, let's go get a king. I'll give you what you want. All right, now, theological statement here, guys. You ready for this? Be careful when God says, I'll give you what you want. Like, for reals. You got to be real careful when God actually says okay to something. Seriously. Like, there's so many good examples of that in the Bible where people are like praying. Oh, if only I had, if you'd only give me this. And then it actually gets scary when God says okay. Like, fine, I'll give you that. Because so often what we want is not what we need. And God can distinguish the difference between a want and a need. So in this case, the people want a king. What they need is God. All right, so they get a king. Who's the king? The king's first king is named Saul. Okay? Saul is voted into being a king, more or less. I mean, he's elected, sort of. Saul becomes king. He's got a big story on how he becomes king. But the big thing to know about Saul, the very first king of the Hebrew people, the very first king in the Bible, King Saul, he is the epitome of what you would imagine and want in a big, burly king. a man's man king. The Bible describes him as being super tall and handsome, and outwardly this guy looks like, yeah, he a king. You know what I'm saying? He'd be like, yeah, he's going places. I want to ride them coattails. You know what I mean? And so there seems to be some character flaws that should concern us when you get to know this guy. But on the outside, he's looking pretty good. He's looking pretty neat. He's looking pretty sharp. And so this guy named Saul becomes elected as and anointed as king over the 12 tribes. They abolish the tribal confederation and they become a monarchy from here on out under Saul. Okay, a couple more notes that I want to make so that will make sense too when if you guys are looking at that picture. Okay, you guys look at the picture. This is ancient Israel. There's all these cities. Okay, these are all different cities. Some of them you'll recognize. Jerusalem is in there. It's by the bottom part, about 2/3 of the part down, and on the right-hand side, it's by the body of water. A couple others that you might recognize would be Bethlehem. That's a little bit farther south. And then there's a couple more in the north and some other things happening here. So before we go too far, to show you how kind of things are going at the time militarily, you guys see the symbol of the covenant, the Ark of the Covenant. It is that yellow thing in the center. It's got a little symbol on it, and it looks like it's got like posts on it, and that's the Ark of the Covenant. That's a physical piece of furniture that represented God's presence. Okay, and that had been traveling with the Israelite people for decades and generations by now. Okay, it is the piece of furniture. Okay, it is like God himself goes where this thing goes type thing, right? And that's their faith practice at this time. And basically what you would do is the people started having more faith in the Ark of the Covenant, this piece of furniture, instead of believing in God. They started believing in using the furniture as a way to almost manhandle God and force God to do things. And God is like, nah, that's not how this worked, guys. I gave you this as a physical sign, not that you would worship the ark, but that this ark would remind you to worship me. And what they start doing is they start sending the ark into battle ahead of the Israelite or the Hebrew people. So they'd line up and the enemy be on one side, and then you'd have the Hebrew people on the other side, and the priests would come walking out with the ark, and they would charge down the hill holding onto the ark, and all the people would be like, ah, and they would charge and they'd fight, and they figured that they couldn't lose as long as they had the ark. Well, the ark is hanging out in this town called Shiloh, and this is important later. This will be really important later. Shiloh becomes a place of worshiping God, okay? This is before a temple exists, but this is where you would go to see that ark. And Samuel, unfortunately, is brought up by a guy named Eli. And the unfortunate thing is that Eli is a good priest who raises Samuel, prepares Samuel to be the final judge. And so Eli's a good guy. Eli's sons are not good guys. They are corrupt, and worse, they're priests. They're corrupt priests. They're into sex and they're into money. All right? And they're priests. And the Bible does not describe them as being upstanding characters. Okay? God is very unhappy with these two guys, these brothers. And they say, as long as we bring the ark into battle, we're good guys. And so they run and they bring the ark into battle and they lose. Oh, it's bad. They fight some of the Philistines, the indigenous people, and they lose. And they lose the ark. This is like if you had one American flag and you sent it into battle before you, and you lost the battle, and you lost the flag, okay? The symbol that kind of connects all these tribes together is taken out by the enemy. And so the enemy, the Philistines, take the ark, and they're like dancing and having a good time, and they put it in one of their own temples as like, hey, check out the trophy piece. And then all of a sudden, like, bad stuff starts happening in their temple. Like statues start falling over, and they're like, what the heck? And they put the statue back up, and then it falls over again, and like arms break off, and the head pops off, and the people are like looking around at each other like, well, this ain't cool. And then all of a sudden they start getting sick, and like boils and stuff, like bubonic plague type stuff starts happening. And eventually they realize it's the ark. The ark. Get rid of that ark. So they strap it to a donkey and an ox. They 2 oxen. They strap it to a cart, and they hit it on the back of the oxen, and they send it down the road like, take it back. We don't want this thing. We don't want it. Because everywhere it goes is bad. And so the ark makes this really weird journey and ends up at this random place called Kiriath Jearim, and everybody forgets about it. Everybody just forgets that this like ark, the national symbol of the Hebrew people. These oxen just come walking into Kiriath Jearim with the national piece of furniture in the back trunk. And this one guy's like, oh, hey, that's our national symbol. We should take care of that. And so he puts it in his house. And then the people forget about it. It's like hanging in this guy's house. The reason that's important, again, is going to be later. You'll get it. Trust me, you'll get it. So when they get a king, they don't have a good sense of nation. Their national symbol is missing. It's just hanging out in this dude's house that nobody remembers. And you have this Saul who becomes king and says, look, we've lost a couple battles recently. We've been fighting each other recently. We got to straighten all this out. And we got to do better, guys. And so Saul is going to be the answer to this. King Saul is going to fix it. Some skirmishes start happening way up north by some Ammonites, indigenous people. They start attacking some Hebrews who are living up north. And Saul rallies the troops, and this is like his big moment. He has just been elected king. A cry for help goes out, and he says, look, we're going to act as one people, and we are going to save our brothers who live up north, the Upers. And so he rallies the people, they run up north, and they win. And this solidifies the idea that, yes, a king is a good idea, and Saul is the right king. As far as the people are concerned, we finally have a king, we're finally back on the right track, we're winning battles, and Saul's the man. Okay, he's the cool guy. And Jabesh Gilead is where that... You guys ever heard the song, There is a Balm in Gilead? You guys know that one? It's a song. It's a hymn. It's actually a beautiful hymn. But it's referring to Jabesh Gilead. And so this big battle, Saul wins, and Saul becomes... kind of solidifies his kingship. Saul starts fighting all these battles, and he starts doing things kind of on his terms. Rather than on God's terms, he does it really on his terms. He starts off okay, but very quickly he's like, I can be the king. I'm going to be the king. I'm going to be the kind of king that I want to be. And he isn't the kind of king that God wants him to be. He stops listening to God's advisors. He stops listening to the people around him that are good and godly. And he starts being a king the way that he wants to be a king. And so he ends up doing some really, really bad stuff and some really, really dumb stuff. He overtly disobeys God. He ends up hanging out with a witch. Whoa, yep, that's awkward. Which is like strictly forbidden in Hebrew practices. You don't dabble in magic and stuff like that. And Saul just does a bunch of dumb stuff. And God says, look, Saul, I'm replacing you, sir. I'm going to bring up and replace you with somebody else who is going to take the throne from you, and I'm going to bless that person, and he's going to be a better king. And that famous king, the most famous of the kings that follows Saul, his name is King David. The crowd goes wild. So there is this young guy, this young shepherd boy, hanging out doing his shepherding thing, and Samuel, the judge, his like last big thing he does before he dies is he goes to David's family and says, David, God's picked you. He's this ruddy, good-looking teenage boy who's out in the fields, and you know, Samuel meets him and says, this is it. Actually, God is the one who says, this is it. God's like, this is the guy. Samuel's like, really? That dude? The freckled teenage boy? He's the one. You sure? God's like, yeah, that's the one. You see, the people, when they elected Saul, looked at the outside. But me, as God, I look at the inside. It's a very famous part of the Bible, is this exact experience. Because Samuel's like, nah, man, God, for reals? Like, this little peanut, squirrely teenage boy is going to be the next king? And God's like, yeah, I look at the heart. I look not at the presuppositions, that the facades and the exterior, but I actually take the time to look into the people's character and see what people can become based on their character. And so Saul looks good on the outside. He's tall, he's burly, he's manly, he's winning battles. But on the inside, he's rotting away. And he's making worse and worse decisions. And so God chooses this little shepherd boy named David to be the next king. And so some incredible and bizarre events happen in David's life. I mean, David has some really it's cool stuff. Like, it's really cool. You might have heard this story. You guys know the story of David and Goliath? You guys know that one? That was a big one. David starts to have success. He launches his career when he goes to Saul is king, and he's fighting a battle, and David shows up, and David has a big impact on the battle by defeating one-on-one, supposedly, the Goliath, the big giant of a man who, he fights this guy one-on-one, and it's kind of like winner take all. The two armies line up, and it's like, come fight me, and it's like 10 feet tall Goliath, and he's this huge dude. And then, do you guys ever see the movie Troy? Oh, come on. Yeah. Troy with, there's a bunch of actors, but Achilles is played by Brad Pitt. And the opening scene of the movie, Brad Pitt is like, two armies line up, and this huge dude who's just ginormous comes walking out in front of the armies. And this is how sometimes ancient warfare was done. You send out your champion, I'll send out my champion. All the rest of them are just farmers anyways. They're a bunch of farmers with some ruddy, spears and sticks that they stick each other with. So rather than wiping everybody out, send out your professional soldier. I'll send out my professional soldier, and we'll save everybody's lives because we need them to harvest, okay? We need them to plant crops. And so the more lives we save is actually better for the kingdom as a whole. The king advances by keeping his people alive, because the armies weren't millions of people. The armies were small. And so you'd send out your professional, and they send out your professional, and like that movie begins with that, and this huge guy comes out, and then you have Achilles come out, and the two clash, and Achilles kills him with like one simple blow, okay? Same kind of picturesque experience in the Bible, where David, this little shepherd boy teenager, takes on this monster of a man and wins. And that begins a trajectory for David's career. He wins a battle. He saves the army. He becomes a national hero. He becomes a musician. David is totally like, I mean, the guy is, he's a brilliant strategist. The Bible does describe him as, quote, ruddy and good looking, and he's a musician. I mean, the ladies be swooning over this guy, okay? Like, this guy's a rock star. He plays the guitar, he's ripped, and everybody likes him, okay? So that's David. And David's career explodes. Very quickly, it becomes obvious that he is the preferred national icon over and against Saul. Things get so bad that some songs get made up in the Bible where the young kids are running around saying Saul has killed, Saul has won his battles. Saul has killed his tens and hundreds and stuff, and thousands. But David has killed his tens of thousands. And he totally one-ups, okay? David becomes the nationally preferred icon and leader, and he becomes a general. At first, Saul just promotes him, and then Saul realizes, is like, oh, wait a minute, my star general is actually kind of a problem to he's a threat to my throne. And so tensions arise, and they start hating each other. Okay? Yeah, not yet. Okay. They start hating each other, and Saul starts trying to kill David. At first, he marries him to his daughter. He's like, maybe I can pacify the guy by marrying his daughter. So he marries David to Saul's daughter. And then he literally starts throwing spears at him. David's like hanging out in the house, and Saul comes in, and he hears the kids singing out back about hundreds and thousands, and David just kills his tens of thousands, and he just blows a gasket, grabs a spear off the wall, and hucks it at David. He just messed up. David's wife, Saul's daughter, comes running in. Get out the back window! And so that's what David does. He runs and he jumps out the back window and scampers off into the sunset. Okay? David and some of his loyal guys ride off into the sunset to become kind of like Robin Hood. David has this like period of his life where he's like Robin Hood. He's this bandit outlaw who the king hates, but all the people love. And he runs around doing good things for people. He runs around still defeating the bad guys. So David and his merry band run around and fight all these bad indigenous people, the Philistines, basically. He fights the people that are the enemies of the Jewish Hebrew nation, while Saul just sits in his castle and hates the guy more and more for all of his success. So tensions rise. David is becoming more and more popular. He's on the run. Bunch of stories, guys. I mean, we're doing 30,000 foot level here. Bunch of stories. But eventually, King Saul, goes up north. If you look at the top there's a couple things. There's one that says Mount Gilboa, and he loses a battle. Saul loses his final battle. He commits suicide. His sons are killed. He gets utterly demolished. He gets annihilated. Saul loses as king, and David is not there. David is running around down south, being this Robin Hood character. And Saul, he kills himself. He falls on his own sword. It's a really messy story, actually. It's really sad, really messy, really sad. He dies knowing he's a disappointment to his people, and even more so, he finally realizes he's a disappointment to God. And he has this huge moment of confession and pain and hurt. And it's really a sad story. So Saul dies, and now it's like, hey, the way is open for David. David, it's your chance to shine. Saul has one son who inherits the throne, but nobody likes him. Saul and his family is from up north. That's part of the reason why he helped out the Yoopers. He's closer with that side of the family. But David is a rascal from down south. And David and the South immediately named David as their king. The South is like, hey, David, Saul's dead. You up, man. Your turn. The North, they're a little more hesitant. They're like, Southerner? No, man, that ain't happening. I ain't jiving. So they put Saul's son on the throne, and so now there's a northern and a southern kingdom. A northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And David, David establishes a capital in Hebron, which is to the south, and Ishbaal, the Saul's son, makes a place up north. Well, Ishbaal, things don't go well. There's a bunch of messy stuff that happens, and he gets assassinated. He gets killed. And ironically, some messengers bring his head to David. Like, look what we did. We killed him for you. We took out the northern guy. Now you can be our king too. And David's like, guys, not cool. And so he kills the messenger. He's like, are you kidding me? This is not the way it's supposed to be done. David's also very shrewd. David ends up, he's extraordinarily violent. A lot of you and a lot of the Bible paints David as this incredible hero. And don't miss how messy David is. David is violent. David goes up north and kills anybody who's a threat to him. He kills the generals. He kills anyone related to Saul. He wipes out the northern leadership. And the north is like, well, everybody's dead. So David's king now. So that's it. That's how David becomes king. King David, the great, wondrous King David, annihilates and just executes all of the north. And since there's nobody else left, he's it. And he becomes king. So now he is king of the north, king of the south, king of the north. He's king of the north and he's king of the south. And because he's king of both, he has one united kingdom again. This is King David's story. He goes from Robin Hood to king, unites the north, unites the south. Everybody's feeling good. And his one big tension is where to make his capital. He's a southerner, and his old capital was Hebron. He just executed most of the north leadership and ruling families and says, okay, I can't have a capital in the south and still rule the north. So he relocates his capital to neutral territory. This is one of the biggest moments in the Bible that everybody overlooks. David has one city that is holding out against him. It is the city of Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem does not like David. It is not filled with Hebrew people. It's this little outcropping holdout, and it's extraordinarily defensible. And nobody can defeat the Jerusalem people. And David, with the entire nation, camps around Jerusalem and swears that he's going to take over Jerusalem. The Jerusalem people are like, nah, David, you can't get us. You ain't nothing, man. We've been here before you. We be here after you. They actually taunt him. They say the blind and the lame could hold you off, David. The blind and the lame could man the walls, and you wouldn't be any match for them, David. You think you're some hot new king. Psh, you ain't got nothing. David sends in his commandos up a water shaft, and they get on the inside of Jerusalem, and they open the gates, and the city falls. The city falls to David's army. And it's kind of weird and kind of sad. Like, David is not, this is what I'm saying. Like, you got to be careful about thinking King David's such a great hero. He's a very complex and violent man, too. The first thing that King David does when he takes over Jerusalem, he executes all the blind and the lame in the city. He kills them all. He's like, you guys taunted me that these guys, the blind and the lame, were strong enough to take me out. And so the first thing I'm going to do with my new capital is kill them all. And so great King David executes the blind and the lame. Now don't miss this, though. This is beautiful. This is good in so much as it draws the juxtaposition with Jesus. It's very important. David is a complex, violent, broken man who makes tons of bad decisions. Okay? He's better than Saul. Saul was all about outward appearance. David has his redeeming moments, and he has his condemning moments, just like us, all of us. But he is juxtaposed with Jesus. David comes into Jerusalem and executes the blind and the lame. Jesus comes into Jerusalem. He seeks out the blind and the lame, and he heals them. The Bible is drawing a narrative connection between David and Jesus, and it does it over and over again, trying to help us understand that a king does not actually look like David. A true and real king looks like Jesus. That's why when in the Old Testament you hear these prophecies about a Messiah and this coming king, when Jesus shows up, most people are like, nah, he's not a king. He doesn't look like David. Yeah, he doesn't. He looks totally different than David. He's humble and kind and compassionate, and he heals the blind and the lame instead of conquering with a sword and with violence. Jesus sacrifices and gives of himself. And so the Bible is trying to make a connection between the story of David and the story of Jesus. And this is one example. So anyways, David relocates to Jerusalem, and the big thing that he does to solidify himself and solidify Jerusalem is he's like, hey, who knows where the ark is? Hey, we lost that a while ago. Who knows where the ark is? And this guy in the back's like, hey, it's hanging out at the dude's house. It's been chilling there for a while now. David's like, let's get it. So they go and they get the ark. And this is a big celebration, and they bring the ark down from Kiriath Jearim to Jerusalem, and David dances in front of the ark in a loincloth. All the ladies be like, this is handsome young king who's a rock star. He's military genius, and he plays the guitar, and he's got a six-pack, and the man be dancing in front of the ark of the Lord. Dance, David, dance. And it actually causes some problems in his marriage, unsurprisingly. His wife, he's got a little bit of context. In that day you had multiple wives. His first wife is Saul's daughter, and she does not take kindly to the image of her husband coming into Jerusalem dancing with nothing but a loincloth on. She's furious at him. But David has his big celebration. He throws his big party and establishes Jerusalem as the place. It's actually, it's huge. The establishment of Jerusalem is massive because he centralizes his governance and religious practice in the same fixed location. If you want to worship, you worship in Jerusalem. If you want to experience God, you face Jerusalem. If you want to sacrifice, you do it in Jerusalem. If you want to be a good Jewish person, a good Jewish boy, a good Jewish girl, and follow the Torah and do the commandments and have a relationship with God, you do that, understanding and knowing that God's favorite place on the planet is Jerusalem. He consolidates the nation state around Jerusalem. And in setting up himself as king there, that's where all the governance happens. That's where all the decision-making happens. That's where faith and governance come together. So when the Bible says that David is a man after God's own heart, if you read that contextually and you take into account the author, the reason that David is a man after God's own heart is because he consolidates and locates worship and governance in one location. One God, one nation, one faith, one place. Jerusalem. All that follows, all the stories that follow, all the kings that come after David are held up to that yardstick. How well did they have one nation, one God, one place? Jerusalem. Everything that follows is held up and against that lens. And the Bible's overt about that. Let me tell you a couple quick more things about this picture. You have David, the image of David there. That's a picture of David on the left-hand side. You have the image of God. That symbol of God is the circle with the arrows going out. And you see a line of crowns kind of in David's forehead. This has to do with how God promises David that he will make him a dynasty. David says to God, God, I have a house in Jerusalem now. I want to build you a house. And God's like, David, dude, I don't need some digs, man. I'm Lord of heaven and earth. The universe is my house. You are my house. I live not in a physical place, but in my people. I live and dwell with my people, with you, David. And so to prove that to you, David, you don't need to build me a house. I will build you into a house. I will build you a house that will last forever. And God does this really quippy thing. Sometimes God's got a really great sense of humor and kind of a snarkiness to him. And so he uses this play on words in Hebrew, and he promises to make David a king. His line will reign forever. So all the kings that follow, that's the idea of the house. David becomes a dynasty. And this is why when you do get to the time of Jesus, the authors in the New Testament go out of their way to tie you back to Jesus. So like, for example, the book of Matthew begins tracing the lineage of Jesus. Why? Because he wants to connect you to King David, to show you that Jesus is, in fact, from the line and the root of Jesse, from David. Jesse is David's dad. So that's kind of what's going on there. Now, David, as much as he had like rock star, incredible, meteoric fame, had a ton of messiness, guys. Great king, expanded the borders, won a ton of battles. Terrible father. Oh, man, this guy had the most messed up family you could imagine. David has sons, he's got daughters, bunch of wives, bunch of concubines. But the big thing is, you'll see on that lower left-hand side, there are 4 crowns representing his 4 sons. He's got four sons. His first son, Amnon, David's firstborn son, lusts. This is kind of gross, guys. Sorry, it's real. It's what happened, and it's broken messiness, but it's in the Bible too. Again, these are not the stories you get in Sunday school. His firstborn son lusts after one of his sisters, his half sister, a sister from a different mother, and ends up raping his own half sister. The second-born son finds out that the older brother did that to one of the sisters, kills him, kills his own brother. Ooh, not cool. And there's so many levels of not cool there. It's just bizarro. So that's one son dead. The second son, who killed the first son, launches a revolt against his own dad. He wants the throne for himself when he grows up. And so against King David, and it's pretty successful. David has to flee Jerusalem. And David's got to leave his own place because his son kicks him out and throws a coup. His own son throws a coup and kicks out his dad. And there's internal civil war. And you're either for King David or for the son. And King David wins. King David's generals bring David victory, and David returns to his own capital and establishes himself once again as king. And his son, who throws the coup, dies. So now David has lost 2 sons. David has another son. Bear in mind, David has a famous story with a girl named Bathsheba, a woman named Bathsheba, has an affair and loses a newborn child there. So a lot of loss in David's life. His third son grows up, and he's got 2 more. He's got a third son, and then he's got a 4th son. The 4th son, his name is Solomon. Okay, the first son dead. Second son dead. Third son is looking at the throne, and dad's getting older, and he's like, I'm gonna inherit. And Solomon is sitting in the wings, and Solomon's mom, Bathsheba, and a spiritual advisor, a guy named Nathan, conspire to make Solomon king with David's blessing. David's like, yeah, Solomon's the right choice here. And so David basically gets on TV and endorses Solomon, while his third son is having a party with all of his friends and claiming that he's going to be king. And so his third son finds out that Solomon just got endorsed and named king and flees. Solomon lets him go, but he says, look, if you're ever a threat to my throne, I'll kill you. And the third son's like, okay, fine. Adonijah, he's like, fine, I won't do anything. I promise I won't do anything. So he goes and lives out in the countryside, and Solomon becomes king. Sadly, eventually, one of the generals tries to talk the guy into throwing a coup. Solomon finds out and has his own brother killed. So that's 3 sons down for David. He loses 3 of his sons. Solomon does survive. Solomon becomes the next king. Okay? We got time for Solomon? Sure, let's wrap up with Solomon. Solomon becomes king. David endorses him, and then David dies. Oh, you want to see something else bad or sad about David? You know David's last words? If you go to the Bible and you read his last words, the way that David kicks the bucket. First off, he's old. You know that you're old in ancient times when they would you would be getting on in years, and your ability to rule was directly related to your ability to procreate and have sex. If you were impotent, you were considered unfit to rule. And so David's getting on in years, and they bring a young concubine into his bedchambers, and he can't perform. And so that's when they say, okay, you're out, bud. And Solomon takes over. David, who's now well on in years, is looking at death. He's lying on his deathbed. He takes his time dying. And his last things are like, Solomon, live good and godly life. And by the way, Solomon, I got 2 things that I need you to do for me. I need you to kill 2 people. No joke. That's how the great King David kicks the bucket. By telling his son, he says, look, I promised that I wouldn't hurt them. These are 2 dudes from my past. We had some bad blood. We had some issues together. And I said I wouldn't kill them. So I need you to kill them for me. As soon as I'm dead, go find these guys and kill them. And then David dies. Like, no joke. That's it. That's how he finishes. He dies. And Solomon does it. He goes, he finds the guys and kills them. I love the Bible. It's just so real. It's so messy. It's so messy, guys. It's one of the things I do love and appreciate about the Bible is that it's so messy and it's so accurate to the messiness of our lives. How silly and stupid and selfish and oh man, we need Jesus so bad. We need Jesus so bad. We need grace, right? I mean, everything you've heard tonight, does this not just indicate how bad we need grace? Solomon inherits the throne. Solomon decides to build the temple. He builds himself a new he builds up Jerusalem. He builds himself a new palace, and he builds God the temple. You can see that in the image there. If you want to learn more about the temple, our first couple series that we did on Tuesday Night Teaching was all about the temple. So you can actually go and listen to those. You can find those on YouTube. Go back and listen to those on the temple if you want to know more about diving into the temple. But Solomon is the one who does, in fact, build the temple. Solomon starts off good in his reign in some regards. He starts off pretty faithful. But while David expanded territory by conquering via military power, Solomon was much more cunning and expanded the territory of ancient Israel by marriage. Solomon started marrying in order to gain more territory and preferable economic status in the ancient world. So if you wanted a good trade with a nearby country, you'd seal the deal with marriage. And because of the way that things were back then, you'd pack up and ship off your daughter to King Solomon, and you would enter his harem. And that's why on this image, in the bottom right-hand side, you see some figures that represent women and some idols. And that is actually a really sad reality, is that by marrying people who are outside, Solomon started building temples not only did he build the temple to Yahweh, his Hebrew god, but he started building temples as he got on in age to the gods of his wives. Ooh, no, 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 no. The great wise and understanding Solomon actually ends up building a bunch of temples to his foreign wives all over Jerusalem, all over ancient Israel. Not cool, not good, and it causes problems. Okay, causes some issues. The other big thing that he did is the way that he built all of these temples, including the temple, the holy temple of ancient Israel, is he awkward. He used forced conscription. He used slavery, his own people. He enslaved his own people. You had to give up a third. It was on a cycle of so many years, but you would come and you would serve as slave labor for the government. That's why you get that picture of the guy hauling a stone there. You would have to serve in Jerusalem, building the palace, building the temples. And what's really bad with Solomon is because David was from the south, and David's family is from the south, and that means Solomon is from the south. If you lived in the north, you got treated differently. The south got tax breaks and conscription breaks. The north had to make up for it. So if you lived in the south, in Judah, you got tax breaks. You were not taxed as heavily. You did not have to show up as often to the military musters, and you did not have to do slave labor. The north, heavy taxes, and you had to relocate your life for a certain number of a cycle. I think it was 7 years. Every 7 years, you had to go down to Jerusalem and spend like 7 years working, and then you could go back home up north. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what I have tucked away in my head. And so the north started to hate Solomon and hate the south even more. So there's growing tension as old grudges are dug up and exacerbated by Solomon. The north and south didn't get along before David. You guys remember all the back we were talking earlier? And by the time you get to David's son Solomon, the north starts to hate the south. The south is lush and preferred, and the north is hard living. And they start to hate each other. By the time Solomon dies, there is a split, north and south. You can see it in the image there. There's civil war as the northern part of ancient Israel breaks off and says, forget you, no more are we going to adhere to the south. We are doing our own thing. And the south continues. Jerusalem is kind of right on the border of north and south, but leans south. And so Jerusalem and everything south remains with Solomon's son. The north elects their own guy. The north elects this guy named Jeroboam. And he sets up, since Jerusalem has the temple and Yahweh and the tabernacle and all that sort of stuff, Jeroboam ends up setting up in Dan and Bethel 2 other locations where you can worship. Okay, so he sets up competing temples. He's setting up in the north a competing government and competing temples. And so now you have a north-south split, a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. They call this the two kingdom period. And the north hates the south hates the north. The south has Jerusalem and Solomon's temple. The north has this other guy named Jeroboam and these other temples that they start building up. So, all right, that's as far as we can get tonight. It's already 8:30. Yeah, we got through King, yeah. And we set ourselves up. Oh, look at all this stuff. Yeah, we didn't even get to this. They just start. Oh, it's Josiah. That's what that is. We'll talk about that here. This is a really good graphic. We'll spend probably all of next time on this one. Yeah, this is what happens, guys. This isn't a snapshot. We're gonna look at this next time. So Jeroboam becomes king of the south becomes known as Judah, okay, and the north becomes known as Israel. Very confusing. Names get really confusing right here. There's Saul, then there's David, and Solomon. And under them, those three, north and south, are united in a Hebrew nation state. Then they split into two separate kingdoms. The south, or the southern kingdom, becomes called Judah, and the northern kingdom, the northern state, becomes called Israel. And that's really confusing. That name Israel becomes really confusing because of, well, I guess obvious reasons. When we use that term Israel moving forward for just this next chapter, we're talking about the northern kingdom. And as you'll find out, it disappears. It goes bye-bye. All right, that's what we got for the stream tonight. Thanks for hanging out on Tuesday Night Teaching. Thanks for hanging out with me. I feel a lot better. Thanks again for your prayers and your encouragement. It is good to be back and starting to do some streaming and starting to do some teaching and stuff like that. You probably won't see me still for a little bit on Sunday mornings. I'm still doing a lot of resting, recovering, and so a lot of that stuff. Catching up, trying to catch up. But this gives me a lot of energy and a lot of joy to be with you tonight. So thanks for joining me tonight. I hope you find it worthwhile as we keep doing this like big picture narrative. This is See Through the Scriptures. We're going to keep doing this for another few weeks before we make a transition. But this is kind of that 30,000 foot look at the biblical narrative is what we've been doing these weeks. As always, guys, hope to see you on Sunday. Hey, we are opening the campus. The campus, that's right. We're opening. It's happening. We're opening. So small groups are kicking up on site, on campus. Super exciting. This Thursday night, you can do Thursday morning meditation with me at 7:30 a.m. And then Thursday night, you can join us on campus for worship, a worship service. It is going to be a communion service. If you have missed communion, like me, you can gather with God's people in person. We're going to have safety precautions and sensitivity around how to do that well. COVID, taking into account the reality with COVID-19, and a chance to gather yet, even so, on campus. It's going to be a great experience Thursday night. You can find more information out on the website. We're inviting you, if you think you might check it out, RSVP, just so we know an idea of like how many people to plan for. That's all. If you forget to RSVP, no big deal. Come anyways. Come, and spread the news. We're starting these Thursday night services. They'll be short and sweet, okay? There's no sermon. There'll be a little bit of music, there'll be a little bit of praying, and there'll be the sacrament, okay? It's trying to get us familiar again with one another and with the practice of gathering together and how we do that as a group. So, strong encouragement, come, check it out, be a part. That's coming up on Thursday night. So, and then Sunday morning, as always, guys, we love to have you come and tune in on Sunday mornings. We are going to continue to stream on Sunday mornings. So, come and experience it. There we go. Thanks for joining me tonight for Tuesday Night Teaching. As always, 7:30 on Tuesday nights. You can join me on 7:30 a.m. for Thursday morning meditation, where we do some praying and some Bible reading. That's only lasts a half an hour. This is our teaching time. This is simulating a class experience. So I'd love to have you join us on Thursday morning for morning meditation. And then if you're interested, come and check out Thursday night, the communion service. So thanks so much, guys. God bless. Love you all. It's so good to be streaming with you again. So fun to be able to connect with you and see you. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being here. Am I missing anything? I think that's it. We'll see you again. See you again soon. God bless.